Thank you very much, colleagues, ministers, Minister for Home Affairs, Dr. Mtwaledi, Minister for Social Development, Minister Zulu, Deputy Minister for Health, Dr. Patla, the Surgeon General, Dr. Dabula, the acting head of health, Dr. Anban Pillay, and the representatives of the different departments, DIRCO, Defense, and other departments present. May I also bring the apologies from Minister Naledi Pando, Minister Mapisa Ngabula, Minister Pegicele. A number of the ministers could not make it to this meeting, Minister Jojo, and so on. So we just want to apologize on their behalf and indicate that they were supposed to be part of this meeting. May I again also thank you for your huge interest. I know yanking you out of your beds on an early Sunday morning is not a very comfortable scene, but also we would thank you for your interest in this matter, and to a great extent, very good reporting that we have seen that indicated that you have been partners in sharing the information with our public. Now, we just want to give a bit of information, which is an update, but in addition, we also want to indicate since the President has issued the instruction for the evacuation of South Africans from Wuhan in Hebei province in China, we just want to give you a little bit of additional information. We must also say that because this is an evolving process, we may not necessarily answer all the questions that you raise because some of this stuff is still being worked on. We just want you to be aware that we are very keen to share as much information as will be necessary. You will excuse me if I were to take you back a little bit on the history of this whole problem, but we thought that's important just to take you a little bit onto the background on this matter. That in December 2019, Chinese authorities announced the emergence of a novel coronavirus that was a causative agent for an outbreak of a respiratory disease, a very unusual one. It is believed that the outbreak originated in food market in Wuhan city in China, and this was thought to have been of a zoonotic origin, but of course we're still waiting for concrete confirmation. The virus has now come to be known as COVID-19. The symptoms largely are respiratory, which can range from mild upper respiratory infection, manifestations to respiratory failure, multi-organ failure, and death. The mortality rate is estimated right now at about 3%, and evidence shows that the vast majority of fatalities are patients who are immunocompromised, either due to extremities of age or pre-existing conditions, that something else was a problem with the patient, and then when they get the infection, then of course their body fails to cope with it. Whilst there are ongoing studies, there's no proven vaccine, and so we learn on this, on managing this problem as we go along. On the 30th of January 2020, due to emerging worldwide spread of the virus, the World Health Organization declared coronavirus a public health emergency of international concern. This sets in motion predetermined global policy implementation that enables the cooperation of governments, the private sector, and multilateral organizations to optimize the response to the spread of the virus and ensure its early detection, its containment in any territory around the world. This includes the ability to strengthen public health systems in territories that are under-resourced. I would like to therefore take the opportunity to thank the World Health Organization for the critical leadership that it has provided. We have been in touch with the Director General as well as the Director inside South Africa as we were managing this particular matter. We've been fortunate that to date there has been no case of COVID-19 inside South Africa. I think it's important for us to underline that, because sometimes when we look at the reports, it's almost like people treat it as though we already are right in the middle of this infection. At the moment, there is no single case. We're just giving you a factual situation. However, as you have heard now, that 2 South Africans who were crew members of the Diamond Princess ship tested positive for the coronavirus. This is the ship that is parked off the coast of Yokohama in Japan, and we are in daily contact with the embassy in Japan, and the Diamond Princess parked off the coast. So we're in touch with the cruise liner itself and the embassy, but also we've made contact with the specific citizens from South Africa. So we've got the names, the details, and we've spoken to some of them. Those citizens from the cruise liner are receiving direct contact with our team, as I've said, to monitor their progress. We've been assured that they are recovering, and those 2 who are on treatment, when they test negative, they'll be free to return to South Africa, because then they would have been cleared of the virus. And so it's all they wait for is treatment and test. When the test is negative, they'll come back. And once they are tested negative, we're no longer interested. They will be coming back as such. However, the others that are waiting to be tested, they will also have to be subjected to a 14-day quarantine, so that thereafter they'll be tested, and then hopefully they'll then be returning without any restrictions. The South African government has worked hard to optimize our state of readiness with the resources and capabilities we have in the event that we should have a case of COVID-19. The multi-sector national outbreak response team, we call it MINORT. Now, that's the team that's represented largely by the ministers and the officials who are here. This team is responsible for tracking and tracing outbreaks around the world, monitoring and analyzing the developments, advising all relevant authorities on the country's response to the outbreak, and ensuring our state of preparedness. This team has been set before. It's the one that's been dealing with the previous outbreaks, the Ebola, the H1N1, the SARS, and so on, whenever, and any other hemorrhagic fevers that have been spotted in our continent. This kind of team is the one that gets to respond when there are those kinds of situations. It's more of an emergency kind of response that we have to deal with. The National Institute for Communicable Diseases had very own picked on the COVID-19 outbreak, and then the MINORT had been convened twice even before. By the time the WHO met, we had already made several meetings to start to activate our standard operating procedure, to put them in place for early detection, containment, and management of a possible outbreak in South Africa. This included bringing up the capacitation of our ports of entry to be able to screen incoming passengers, especially those from China and other affected countries, and preparing tertiary institutions to be referral centers for the isolation and management of COVID-19 patients, as well as to take advantage of their research capabilities. We did update the public on this issue, indicating that we had actually deployed thermal scanners all over. We've trained people and we've sent people to actually check on the response of our system to people who are coming through. On the eve of the WHO announcement, I held a press briefing detailing these measures, which included the activation of the Emergency Operations Center in the event of a WHO public health emergency announcement. When that announcement was made, our Emergency Operations Center was immediately activated. Many of the media had an opportunity to go and see this particular center just to see of how it's supposed to work. The 24-hour clinician hotline was set up, as well as a working hours hotline set up for the public. The public hotline number is 0800 08000 29999 and operates from 8 to 4. And if in South Africa, if we were to confirm a case of coronavirus, the public hotline would be converted to a 24-hour hotline. So we're just on standby. If there's a case, then of course we start running 24 hours. We're waiting for that, we're ready. These hotlines have been extremely busy, fielding a number of calls from clinicians and the public, and the second line has also been linked to the clinicians' hotline. And in this, the reason why this is the case is that when we send the information out, we've said to our clinicians, our nurses, anything that looks, let's call symptoms, which are severe, even if it might be a common cold, just take the precaution to do the test and refer us for opinion so that we actually don't miss anything. An interministerial committee was formed, as I've indicated, the Health, Defense, Home Affairs, International Relations, Cooperation, Justice, Social Development, Police, State Security, and so on. These ensure that there is coordinated collaboration across different departments, and each is able to directly respond to specific needs that may be required from it. Since the outbreak of our government has issued daily statements with situational updates for South Africa, and we've actually got some of our top specialists actually giving voice messages even to deal with queries that are coming from the public. Sometimes we pick those up in Facebook, and sometimes we pick it up in the media where we think that there's something that needs to be corrected and clarified. We deal with it that way. So as of the 26th of February, 121 people have been tested for coronavirus, and all results were negative. On the first week of the outbreak, the number of citizens wishing to return was negligibly low. So in fact, the first time we started contacting our people, we were able to reach the first 34 people were in Wuhan city. And then, of course, 33 of them didn't want to return. One only was wishing to return. And then we said, okay, we'll keep extending the net until we find everyone. And I think we must be aware that South Africans tend to go to any country without reporting to the embassy. So just to know who is there, it takes quite a while to update. So we've been dealing with this update on a continuous basis. So the first time when the question was raised about whether they want to come back or not, the first 34 said, only one said yes, they would like to be brought back. And we had also considered the situation in China, in Wuhan, and we thought that their precautionary measures were fairly adequate to be able to address the situation. And also we took note of the WHO's advice that no ban on travel and trade should be imposed, and we also were in contact with the Chinese government to look at the extent of their readiness to deal with the problems should any of our citizens be infected. We were quite satisfied at that point that we could actually deal with the situation conservatively, allowing people to be there in China. But we have been in contact constantly with them, with our citizens, as well as with China. But every day our minority team has been sitting and evaluating new information that arises, and then sending the information for the ministers to look at it. And on a continuous basis, our view has been to take the necessary decisions as the situation arises. So on a day-to-day basis, we've been evaluating what is happening to our citizens and to the conduct of the viral infection. We must commend DIRCO and the staff, as well as the Chinese authorities, for assisting to locate our citizens in China. This work has actually been quite elaborate, because we gave a directive that each and every citizen in Wuhan must be frequently contacted personally, and then their concerns must be recorded. In other words, he must be phoned, and then they must say, this is so and so, how are you, where are you, what's happening there, are you well, do you have any concerns, do you have any needs, do you want to come back, and so on. This was frequently, sometimes every day on some of the people, sometimes several times in a week. So this has been an intense process that has been embarked upon by DIRCO. That's why we really want to commend DIRCO for the good work that they've done in this case. And there's been lots of cooperation with the Chinese authorities in Shanghai, in Beijing, and in the consular offices in Shanghai, to make sure that we stay in touch with as many of our people, and make sure that where we had not enough information, they made that information available. In some instances, government had to intervene to give advice to individuals, advise them. We got them into a WeChat group in China, and therefore there was frequent exchange of information. They would ask questions, and then our officials would then respond and give them advice on the WeChat groups. And then when there are queries that their embassy couldn't deal with, they would come back to us, would get the expert opinion and send them back the advice, as it were. And in some instances, there were those who had special requirements. Some of those, for example, who were having medications which was available in South Africa but not in China. We had to actually make special arrangements for dispatching those medicines so that they can get into China. And the Chinese embassy, here, as well as the Chinese authorities, have been very, very supportive as we actually made this information, these supplies available. Sometimes they raise the concerns about low food supplies, then we'd go back to China and raise this issue, and then China would explain what had happened and correct the situation. And so in all the instances, the Chinese authorities have been very helpful and supportive, and we were happy with the conditions of our citizens. I think it's important to make this point here because we have been working very closely to look at the interests of South Africans in China, and we have been getting the kind of support that we would really expect from China, based on our diplomatic offices in China. In some of the cases, people have now raised issues of personal resources that are running low. Some of them indicating anxiety to return home, and then the requests now started increasing. Now, therefore, government has got specific identities of individual South Africans, their exact location, their conditions, and what they're doing in China. And so we have all of this information. We've always prioritized the conditions of the South African citizens in China. So we've got all of this information. There was a time when we didn't have much of this information in terms of the details, as I was indicating. Today we've got all of those of that information. So I think that the accusations that the government didn't repatriate our people because we prioritized diplomatic relations with China, and the accusations that the government is sending mixed messages, I think that's very ill-informed. It's also mischievous, and I think these are attempts to create sensations and controversy on a matter that I think requires our single-minded focus of South Africans so that we focus on the safety of our citizens. So day-to-day decision-making was what really helped us to decide at which point we want to intervene, and we're looking at a lot of those factors as the situation was evolving. Following the President's directive for the repatriation of asymptomatic South African citizens in Wuhan city, where the epicenter of the outbreak is, such contingency plans are now being effected as a matter of extreme urgency. We've noted that other areas of China do not represent a high risk of exposure to COVID-19, and so the citizens under lockdown in Wuhan have been prioritized. In other words, if you have the South African who is in Shanghai, in Beijing, in some other parts of China, Shenzhen or wherever, and they want to fly into South Africa or want to fly to China, we are making no restrictions there. There are no problems. The ones that we want to evacuate are the ones who wish to be repatriated, who are in Wuhan city, and those who are in the neighboring areas within Hebei province. And this is important because it's not about just telling all South Africans in China to come back. It's about those who are in the epicenter of the infection, where the outbreak is highest and the risk of infection is highest, as well as in the area which has got a lockdown, because a lot of their activities are reduced. Some of them students are studying, they are in their rooms, they have to stay in there. Some have finished, as I indicated. So that's the area we're focusing on. We're not focusing on the rest of China, we're only focusing on Wuhan, and those are the ones that the President's injunction is about. We've been able to ascertain that approximately, right now, the figure keeps changing. Right now, the figure we have is that about 201 South Africans are living in the area of Wuhan, and 151 have indicated the wish to be repatriated. So a few days ago, we had a number which was different. At some point we had 80, and at some point the number went to 130, and then of course now the figure is 151. And this is based on us calling people every day and asking them, are you still fine? Do you now want to change? Do you want to come? Yes or no? We're finding new people, so and so, we've located so and so in such and such a place, and therefore would like to contact them, and then that's why the numbers keep increasing. 16 citizens have indicated no, they don't wish to return. They are still comfortable and they would like to be assisted wherever they are, but without having to come back. There was also a South African citizen who elected to be repatriated with Indian citizens who were recently evacuated by the government of India. We're not really involved, except that on the last moment we received a call to say, does South Africa have an objection if anybody went to join the flight to India? Well, of course, we didn't have any objection to that, so long as if the individual was going to be put into quarantine for 14 days and be tested negative before they return, we don't have any problem. In response to the plea of our citizen to return, Cabinet therefore instructed the Interministerial Committee to effect the plans to evacuate those and repatriate those citizens. At this stage, through DIRCO, we're making an effort to locate the remaining 36 South Africans in Wuhan that we're trying to find so that we can just get them to indicate what their situation is. So we're making a special appeal to families who may have relatives in Wuhan to contact DIRCO. I'll read the numbers, but of course I'm sure you'll find it and you might be able to help us to publish it. And the number is 012-351-1754. The other one is 012-351-1756. And then of course we've got an email to DIRCO, which is cicc1@dirco.gov.za, and also cicc2 in the same domain. The repatriation process will be implemented in 3 phases, namely the evacuation, the 1 phase, the quarantine, the 1 phase, and the reunification. Those are the 3 phases that we're going to be focused on. These are guided by the WHO guidelines and the relevant South African laws, policy, and policy framework. So I'll go through some of these phases just to give you a sense. The evacuation is an exercise that will be undertaken by the military in cooperation with DIRCO and the Chinese authorities. DIRCO has got the responsibility, but they are supported by the defense, the military. So working with the Chinese authorities, the evacuation will be prioritized by those particular authorities. All South African citizens from Wuhan city that wish to be repatriated will be accommodated and brought back in an aircraft that will be under strict protocols of quarantine when they come back. There will be a multidisciplinary team on board the aircraft that will be responsible for pre- and in-flight screening and medical care, and all nationals that do not meet the medical screening requirements during the pre-screening phase will be referred to the Chinese health system. A port of entry has been prepared for the receipt of South African nationals and flight crew and medical team. In other words, what we're then doing is we'll have a direct flight. There's a limited time within which this will be executed once they're in Wuhan, and then they'll come back straight into South Africa. We'll create a dedicated channel for this. That means the aircraft, the crew, and the landing base, everything is going to be dedicated and focused onto it. I'm sure every one of you wants to know now, which aircraft and who's going to go there. Well, we will not be able to give you that because the Defense Force is working. They're fairly capable of making this decision, so we've left it with the Defense Force to sort out the modalities of transporting people to bring them here. The other issue is that all the staff, support staff that will be handling the quarantine process will also go into quarantine themselves. So that is now to seal the whole chain so that anyone who could have been exposed will actually be brought in. We've also, as Department of Health, made a recommendation that when they load those passengers in, if there's anyone that might be requiring any sort of isolation inside the particular aircraft, there should be provision made so that they could be isolated en route coming this way. That is just to add, precautionary measures to make sure that we do as much as possible to stay within the strict isolation procedures and protocols. So that is what we call the evacuation. Then our planners are at an advanced stage on this one. I think we also will understand that once the defense force gets activated, there are certain of the activities that fall within the code of the confidentiality that defense force issues, military code, will actually not allow us to be making those statements here because of the nature of the operational involvement. The second aspect is quarantine. The very nature of quarantine exercise is to isolate the group of COVID negative people who have been exposed to a high risk environment. Remove them from the high risk of a high risk environment and then allow the determined incubation period to lapse before being integrated into society. Human contact and mixing of groups will be limited in the entire process. Now, this is important also to say to South Africans. The people that we are bringing in are South Africans who are healthy and as far as we are concerned, they are not infected. We only want to take a precaution to allow the tests to be done so that in the period during which the virus should be incubating, we should then confirm that they didn't get infected and therefore they can be released. It's a very important precaution that must be respected because the risk of anyone just walking straight from the high outbreak area into the society is that if they caught the infection on the last day, they've got about 14 days within which we will not see any symptoms, and thereafter, by the time we intervene, they would have probably infected other people. So they are not, as they come here, infected. And I think we need to put that up so that, and I also hope that the media is also not going to be whipping up a paranoia about South Africans who are going to infect everyone in the locality and that everyone is in a particular risk. We just want to handle this matter responsibly. So those South Africans are not infected. They are coming here. It's a precautionary measure that you do under these kinds of situations. So we will therefore be identifying a quarantine facility that meets our requirements. Now, before somebody asks where is that going to be, we are not going to give you the name yet. We must just say to you, the teams have been out there. They've actually inspected 84 sites. So whatever anybody might have told you that they've been here, they've been there, they may well have been. 84 sites. Again, the team is capable of finally identifying the right place so that we can actually use that. But the requirements would be that there will be a perimeter line, which is the outer perimeter that will be guarded by the military. In other words, there should be no easy entrance into the site. Then it is actually considered as a no entry zone and no fly zone. So you shouldn't really be wandering into that area. It's really a precautionary issue. And those who are under quarantine will not be allowed to exit the perimeter, but will be allowed to move freely within the perimeter, although we will be discouraging group meetings. Someone can move around, but they need to stay far from everyone else, and as far as possible, they should really keep into their rooms, because that's what they've been doing whilst in Wuhan, and therefore we just want to reduce unnecessary mixing. Although they come from Wuhan, they don't come from exactly the same space, so they would have come from different parts. So we'd like to just make sure that they are protected. No one will be allowed to enter the zone. Not the media, not the families, not the officials who want to come and inspect from whatever. Only those who are assigned are going to be allowed to be in there. And there will also be a no man's land, which will allow the exchange of the supplies of goods. So they'll be delivered to a particular point, and with necessary precautions and protection, then the others will collect it from that point. So there will be all those kinds of protection. We then want to plead with the media that even if you will find out or you are informed of this particular location, please don't make any attempts to enter the quarantine zone. And maybe may I also just say that if you were successful in entering the quarantine zone, you will not be successful in leaving it. So I think it's important to understand that once there's a need for quarantine, we consider that you will voluntarily subject yourself to the need for a quarantine. But if you didn't, there will be law enforcement to actually encourage you to stay within the quarantine zone. And I think we must understand that it's a very, very serious and sensitive matter, and we really like to ensure that no one really tries to place any pranks around it. The support staff in the facility will be subject to quarantine protocols. The entire quarantine period will be around 21 days to allow for arrival and phased exit. The incubation period is 14 days. We want you to stay until day 14, then we start doing the test and then wait for the test. So within that last week, we're basically just wanting to be sure that we have got the results back. We also want to make sure that we begin to explain to the individuals and counsel them so that when they get to the community, how do we deal with the issue? The real concern we want to make sure we don't run into is a problem of stigmas, where somebody starts getting excited, that there might be a risk. We just want to make sure that this issue is handled properly. Now, there will be legal action taken on those who go against the stipulated regulations of the quarantine requirements. And that's within the law. There will also be medical facilities to be installed in the area so that there will be a way of dealing with those immediately affected or that need attention at the time. On arrival, the members will be on the quarantine. They'll be briefed and tested, and there'll be screening that will be done at certain intervals. And should anyone exhibit symptoms whilst in the quarantine, then they'll be immediately isolated. And then if they're found to be positive of the coronavirus, they'll then be transferred to the designated facility within the area where they are. We have indicated that there are about 13 hospitals that are designated, so they will actually be taken there for treatment. Then, of course, should there be multiple cases of coronavirus, then we'll escalate this to multi-isolation system, whereby we will therefore be stricter with the movement, confine them more into other rooms, etc., etc. This, I think, we learned a lot from observing what happened in the Diamond Princess. Some of you would have seen the stories that came from there in terms of really how strictly we need to try and adhere to the quarantine process. So that was the second phase, which we call the quarantine process, as it were. And I want to again appeal to the media that we know sometimes your sources can give you information, you like to break a story, you like to come with something that is not reported by anybody else, but please respect the quarantine line. That issue is very, very important. It's not about you, it's not about your story, it's about the safety of South Africans. And therefore, that's why everyone who's going to be involved in this, beforehand they will actually be asked to declare that they will be willing to stay for the protocol period. And those will be landing into the aircraft. One of the preconditions is that they'll have to agree to go to quarantine. If you're going to be evacuated, you must first agree you're going to be agreeing to the quarantine and move on. But of course, if there's any kind of possibility of disruption of the quarantine requirements, there's a law to protect us on that. We can even take the matters to court. So there is a way of managing such a situation. We don't believe that South Africans will want to go that route, because all of us are aware we're trying to really make sure we do the best for ourselves and our community. The last phase is the reunification. And we assume here that this will be an incident-free quarantine. So the final day of the quarantine will be denoted by members being testing negative of the virus, and therefore they'll be given counseling, and they'll be given leave to depart. And then we need to, therefore, amongst the team, we'll have social workers. They must also, interact with the families, just to make sure that everyone understands that yes, they might have been in the area, but they are not really posing any risk. And so that will then go into the whole program of disinfection, of decontamination of all the items that were associated. And we believe that there are good enough protocols for that, and everything after that should be acceptable. Now, that really deals with the issue that the President has given us an instruction on, and we have indicated to you the situation about the Diamond Princess as well. But let me just comment briefly on a few other areas. Whilst it can never be possible to predict what will happen in South Africa if the virus were to be introduced in our territory, I think it's a useful exercise to look at what's going on globally. We continue to monitor global events, developments, and we're in touch with our embassies, and we also talk to some of the clinicians and some of the researchers who are in these particular areas. We are concerned that when we first reported this matter, there were only about 4,500 cases reported, largely in China. They were mainly in China. Today, the coronavirus has spread to 50 countries worldwide. And we think that the consequences are beginning to be devastating, because you are now beginning to pick up deaths in countries away from China, and this number is rising. So we are in touch and receive twice daily updates from some of the embassies of the ones that we have targeted and we're working with. In particular, South Korea has got a rapidly rising COVID-19 cases. We've been in touch, in particular there with the embassy and the South Korean authorities. They have over 2,000 cases reported. The last we checked, it was about 13 deaths. And the city of Daegu is the one that seemed to be the epicenter, which is about 300 kilometers from Seoul. And Seoul itself has got about 65 cases reported. The rest of them are with South Korea, are with Daegu. And it is felt that there was a religious group that had a huge gathering, and quite a bit of infection could have also spread from that group as they broke from their conference, and then they started spreading. We do have South Africans in this particular area, and we are actually aware that the South Korean government is taking specific steps now to impose certain precautionary measures, closing down certain buildings and also moving people into some of the areas and so on. We keep monitoring this. We think it's important. At the moment, we haven't issued any specific bans on any matter. We're just saying anyone who comes back into South Africa, we must actually widen our net of actually asking more questions, so that we rely on voluntary disclosure at that level. Iran is an area of concern, seeing that there are about 141 cases and a high mortality of 19 of those. Now that's actually pretty high considered mortality if you look at the numbers. 141 deaths with 141 cases and 19 deaths, even involving some of the very senior leaders in the area. I think we are also concerned, and we're just watching what's happening. We understand that both Algeria and Nigeria have one infection each, and those who are infected have got no history of travel to China. In fact, from what we have found, it seems that these are people that traveled to Italy. Italy already reported in the past few weeks that there had actually a third generation spread from someone who was in China, and then they infected a relative, and then the relative seemed to have also infected a health worker. These are just the stories that we read from the media, were indicating the changing pattern of how the disease is manifesting. Reports of death in the USA has also come out, and there are also individuals infected that have got no record of any known person with COVID-19, which means now we're beginning to see COVID-19 prevailing in communities that have got no link whatsoever with China. I think we have to all get ready, as there is no country that has a formula to prevent the coronavirus from infecting its people. But I think we must make a bit of a distinction. Up to now, we're dealing with the issue as an emergency, wherein there will be a case coming in, and then we'll deal with that and so on. Like we've dealt with the previous episodes of Ebola, hemorrhagic fevers, H1N1, and so on and so on. So that is a situation where you have a case and you all activate emergency measures around it. And when we say we're ready, we're talking about that. We can still deal with any one of the cases if they landed up in South Africa. That's the readiness that we've been talking about, and that's one issue. But I think in the long term, the WHO has also raised the point that we must now prepare for a coronavirus which will be endemic in different countries, literally all countries, and so. But I think the fortunate part is that there's quite a lot that's been led within the very few weeks with the treatment regimes in China, with the approaches that they've done. I think that the way they've dealt with it has also been quite instructive. There are a number of research areas that need to be done. For example, the question of how soon after the patient is tested negative of the virus does it stop being infectious. Common experience suggests that once someone tests negative, there should be no possibility of transmitting the virus. So that's how we understand, and that's the approach. But I think we do need to now look at that. It's important to get research into that direction, because it's got implications for those who are returning having been treated already for the virus and so on, and to what extent the immunity can be built in the individual to avoid reinfection in the future, to what extent right now what has been said is that there's not been any evidence of a rapid mutation of the virus which will suggest that the same immune system that dealt with the virus when it was under treatment might be affected, might not be effective if it comes back again. So these are just speculatory areas, and I'm just saying we can't answer those questions. We're just saying that we're interested in all of this. But we think that the manner that China has managed the outbreaks has many lessons for the global community, and they've indicated what mistakes we need to avoid and what kind of treatment has been effective, seeing that China has treated the largest number of people with HIV, with coronavirus, which is 80,000 patients. Approximately 32,000 have been treated and released from hospital in China, and around 46,000 that are still on treatment, with about 2,900 deaths. So already you're going to, I think, get to a point where there would have been more people who are released from treatment, who are cured of the infection, than those who actually still have it. And that's actually very good news, because as we look at how the disease behaves, all of us are going to be taking lessons from China. And relatively speaking, the mortality rate is 3%. It's a lot of people, but I think the mortality rate is actually not so high as it were. But of course, we have indicated that the normal flu, the influenza virus, has got a much higher mortality globally. So furthermore, as I've said, that the numbers of recoveries in China, is actually beginning to exceed new infections that they are recording per day. So this is a positive picture for us. So I think that to conclude, we need to watch and bear in mind the highly dynamic nature of the global coronavirus phenomenon, and we are also working already on looking at how the system in the long term should be able to deal with this. So we are already conducting and convening a large number of our specialists, clinicians, virologists, specialists in infectious disease control, and so on, so that we can look at dealing with the issue now more on a longer term basis, because I think we're going to soon be out of emergency mode, and we have to deal with the resilience of every system to be able to deal with the problem. Our level of vigilance continues to be at the highest level in the wake of the WHO announcement of coronavirus as a public health emergency of international concern. We will also continue to issue situational updates in the form of media statements, and also we will also keep updating the public in terms of what needs to be done. I think also it's important that the people that we are talking about, we are dealing with people who are healthy otherwise, and who are either in school or doing business or on holiday in Wuhan, and therefore their dignity is also important. We should really not begin to deal with their situation and create a sense where they must be hounded now and be treated as some kind of individuals that must be viewed with suspicion. And I also think that at this point it's important for us to commend China and also thank them for their cooperation and for the way that they've been sensitive each time we raise issues and concerns from our citizens in China. They've actually been able to respond. And we also believe that, as I've said, that China will continue to give lessons to the whole global medical community about a lot of things that have been lessons from the managing the infection. And as we are here today, we think that it's going to be important for us to give you regular updates if there is anything new, but I think it's going to be a matter of time that all countries will ultimately have to face, the coronavirus being something that's discovered in the country at some point, and all of that basically means that we must just begin to adjust to that. But I think, as many of the past epidemics, it becomes important to say that medical technology advancement and advancement in research has always been very handy in dealing with this. Already the discussions are about issues of vaccine, issues of the most effective antiviral agents to be used, and so on. And I believe that we all can take lessons out of this process. But what we really believe is going to be our biggest enemy in this issue is to allow disinformation, fake news, creation of doubts when we send out messages, and questioning them with no basis with no scientific basis, and people who are going to create a sense that people are not being told the truth, therefore people must be all worried. It's going to be a matter of concern that we will actually be self-defeating, and therefore hence our plea that this whole hammering on South Africa is not ready, South Africa is not ready. I don't quite understand where that comes from, because we've actually had a number of outbreaks that we've been ready to deal with and contain, and we've been able to deal with them. And if people were raising the issue based on already the effect of or impact on the infection in South Africa, even before we have the first case, now the reports are, well, South Africa is not ready. Yes, there are challenges in the health system, and the challenges in the health system don't mean that people aren't being treated and cured. It doesn't mean that we will not be able to respond to situation. But I think, as we have seen, a number of countries, we've learned quite a lot. There are some countries that evacuated their citizens and they are sitting with infections in their countries. And so everyone does what they think is best for their situation, and there's no one that I think has got an expert view as to how to manage this situation. But I think it's important to learn from one another. I think it's also important that when you come across, as members of the media, you come across issues that need to be brought to our attention, we need to also look at that. And we continue to monitor the situation on a day-to-day basis, and as we do so, we have the interest of all South Africans at heart, and we actually believe that with the team that's going to be doing this work, they'll successfully execute it in a way that will make sure that the best outcomes, we get the best outcomes for South Africa. I'd like to stop at that point and want to say that if any of the colleagues would like to add at this point, we should feel free to ask my colleagues to add, because this is a multi-departmental, interministerial effort. It's not just one department. I think just the indication is that DERCO and Department of Health are in the forefront. The evacuation is DERCO, but supported by the military. The quarantine is Department of Health, supported by the military, and also the rest of the other services, as I've indicated. So all of us are going to be working on this together. Thank you very much.